Well, welcome to the first week of our new message series, a series that we are calling Me, Myself, and Us. Seems like an appropriate subject for a series at this time because over the last couple of months, of course, there's been a whole lot of me, myself, but as most of us could testify, not a whole lot of us. What we're doing here this morning is a perfect example of that. And indeed, over those past few months, we have faced challenges that most of us have never faced before, and that we never really ever expected to have to face. And one of the biggest has been the way this virus, which is known after all to spread quickly and easily and can truly threaten our life. One of the biggest challenges we faced has been the way this virus has separated us from one another. For weeks now, those of us deemed non-essential have been under a stay-at-home order. Now, that has meant different things to different people. Some of us are alone. Some of us are sharing, we could say, our isolation with others. In one way or another, though, for the sake of our own health and the health of others, we have all become more socially distanced. That is especially true of some of our oldest and most vulnerable, those living in old age homes or long-term care facilities. For their own protection, they have been separated from us and we from them. Maybe you have seen stories of people visiting parents and grandparents in those homes the only way it can be done these days, looking and waving through glass doors or windows and perhaps talking to them on the phone while they do that. Scenes like that touch our heart, even more so as we remember that many of these homes have faced or might well face an outbreak of COVID-19 among the most vulnerable. Just when our loved ones need us most, we are unable to be with them, unable to protect them, unable to help them. Perhaps not so dramatically, but in one way or another, the past few months, we have all experienced this separation, this isolation. It is an experience we want to come to an end. It is an experience that we hope now is beginning to come to an end. But it has been, and to some extent still is, our experience. And I want this morning to contrast that experience, the experience of separation and isolation, with something that happens in today's first reading from the Acts of the Apostles. I mentioned a few weeks ago about the four Gospels, four stories of Jesus' life, his teaching, his death, and his resurrection. Well, the Acts of the Apostles takes up the story where the Gospels leave off after Jesus' resurrection. In fact, it was actually written by the author of one of the Gospels. It was written by Luke. And in today's reading, Luke shows us Philip proclaiming Jesus' resurrection to the world outside of Israel, at least outside of Judea, in Samaria. Luke reports that Philip was healing the sick and bringing people to faith in Jesus. When the church in Jerusalem hears what's going on, they send two of the apostles. They send Peter and John to meet these new Christians. Here's what happened next. The two went down and prayed for them that they might receive the Holy Spirit. Then Peter and John laid their hands on them, and they received the Holy Spirit. Those of you who have been coming to church for a while might recognize in this story the earliest beginnings of the sacrament of confirmation. But rather, this morning, I would like us to concentrate on something different and concentrate specifically on this phrase. Peter and John laid hands on them. Now, in one sense, as I said, this is a story of the church, the story of a sacrament. In fact, the laying on of hands, so titled, is still part of the sacrament of confirmation today. But at the same time, and for the same reason, because it is a story of the church, it's also a human story. It is a story of relationship. And human relationships, like human beings, involve both body and spirit. Peter and John certainly could have stayed in Jerusalem and prayed that those people receive the Holy Spirit. Just as those families outside the nursing home windows could have prayed for their loved ones from home, they could have even talked with them from home. But they didn't do it that way. They stepped out the door, they got in their car, and they drove to where their loved ones were so that they could be with them, body and spirit. And that's what Peter and John did as well. Well, absent the car. They didn't drive, but they did step out the door and hit the road. They came from Jerusalem to be with these new Christians. And then they laid their hands on them. They shared the Holy Spirit with them. They shared God with them. Now, anyone with a basic idea of what we mean in our culture when we say God, even an atheist, could tell you that God, as Christians understand him, that God didn't need to depend on Philip, Peter, or John in order to have a relationship with those people in Samaria. In the same way today, he doesn't need to depend on me to have a relationship with you, or to depend on you to have a relationship with me. That is completely unnecessary. He doesn't need us. He is God, after all. He doesn't need us, but he has chosen us. He chose to depend on Philip and the apostles in order to deepen his relationship with these new Christians. And he also chooses to depend on you and me to deepen his relationship with the people we meet, the people we are in relationship with. And in the same way, he depends on them to deepen his relationship with us. In fact, God sometimes works in our life through these relationships, whether or not the person he is working through even acknowledges that he exists. We are made for relationships, but we are also made by relationships. Relationships with God, yes, and first, but also relationships with each other. That is how our Creator intended us to be, intended us to live. And now I want to go back to that part of the story, go back to the story of creation from the very first book of the Bible. Whether you are a Christian or not, it's probably going to sound a little bit familiar. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And so the story goes on through the creation of the earth, the sea, and the sky, the creatures of earth, sea, and sky, the sun and the moon. And every time something new comes into existence, there is that same refrain. God saw that it was good. Then finally, God completes his work. He creates us. He creates Adam, the first human being. And only then, with creation complete, does God's response change. God saw everything that he had made, and indeed, it was very good. Creation was complete, and it was very good. Or was it? Our story continues. Then God said, "It is not good that man should be alone. I will make him a helper as his partner." Now, we can and should hear this story in the context of marriage, but it has even more to teach us. One spiritual writer puts it like this: what is striking about this passage is that the fall has not yet occurred. Adam has not sinned. And so there is no sin, there is no disobedience, there is nothing to harm the man's relationship with God. Each word he and God speak to each other at that time is filled with closeness and joy. The Bible tells us that he walks with God in the garden in the cool of the day. How could a relationship be closer than that? He is known and loved to the very core of his being by his all-knowing, love-filled Creator. Perfect relationship. And yet, the word God uses to describe him is alone. And God says this aloneness is not good. We are made by God. And it has sometimes been said that each of us has within us, within our heart, a God-shaped space, an empty space that only God can fill. But as we think about that creation story, doesn't it also seem that each of us has within us a human-shaped space, an empty space that God himself, by his own plan, will not fill? We are made by God, we are made for God, and we need God. But by his design, by his purpose, we are also made for relationship with one another. And we need those relationships as well. Nothing can substitute for them. Not money, not work, not books, not music, not busyness, the busyness of our current life, not even God himself. Our human relationships are part of God's plan for our lives, and they are necessary for us to live the full, abundant, joyful life that the Lord desires us to live. We don't always remember that, and our society, our culture doesn't always remember that. Indeed, we live in a world where the life that we are expected to live, ordinary everyday life, doesn't seem to leave us with the room, the time, or the energy that we need to be fully the person we want to be in relationships and also in many other parts of our life. But it's not as if that life is nothing but a dream. We actually have all already had a taste of it, and sometimes more than a taste. Remember, we said that God chooses to depend on you and me to deepen our relationships with each other, but even more fundamentally, to deepen his relationship with us. Well, the good news is he has already been doing that in your life. So, here is your homework for this week. I want you to spend some time this week, some quiet time, to reflect on when that might already have happened in your life. If you're not sure about God yet, that's okay. Just think about relationships or particular moments where it seems like God could have been working if he's actually there. Either way, I'd like you to remember times when you have encountered special gifts, what we would call God's gifts. Goodness, kindness, patience, perhaps forgiveness. Whatever it might be. When you have encountered these in and through your relationship with others. And hopefully doing that will also help you to realize that even as you and I walk through our very ordinary days, or at least what used to be our ordinary days, days before social distancing, days that we hope will soon return, as we walk through those days, you will realize that as we meet each other, talk to each other, laugh together, and sometimes also argue and hurt one another, you will realize that what we are doing in those ordinary relationships is actually something in which God is involved. They're part of the story of creation. They're part of the story of the world and the universe. And you will realize that your ordinary life is something even bigger and more important than you realize. Over the next few weeks, we're going to lean into that truth. We're going to be looking at our life and our relationships, remembering what the Lord teaches us about who we are and about how we relate to each other. And we'll be considering decisions that we might make, attitudes and behaviors we might change, sometimes as individuals, sometimes as a couple, a family, or even as a community. Decisions we might make, things we might do that will let us better fulfill the Lord's dream for our future. The dream, and please God, the reality of a full, rich, abundant, and joyful life.